Associate Professor Konak Saxena is from the School of Banking and Finance at UNSW and joins us now. Konak Saxena, welcome. Now, before we get into the detail of individual sectors, do you agree with the overall assessment of Alan Fels about the business-consumer dynamic in Australia?
Firstly, thanks for having me. Yes, I do agree. As a consumer, I can feel the price increases and they seem very high and increasing. As an economist, I am a bit more careful. I agree with the fact that given what we see in the data, there should be an investigation into what's causing these increases. But I'm not. The report doesn't claim that we have found that businesses are not acting in the proper way. So I think, yes, I agree that an investigation should start.
Okay, so almost half the submissions to this inquiry were regarding the supermarket sector. What's happening in that sector?
Well, so on one hand, you see huge price increases across the board. Milk, cheese, I think more than 20% increases were in the report. And then you have a slight difference between foreign players and domestic players like Aldi's versus Coles and Woolworths. So there are questions around whether this is happening because of supply constraints, which was the reason given for inflation in the past, or whether there might be some sort of collaboration in the prices or some lack of competition that is creating these high prices where businesses are taking advantage of consumers just willing to pay higher prices because they think there's inflation and prices are going to increase.
So as far as you're concerned, in the supermarket sector, like you said before, there's evidence that an investigation might be warranted, but you can't necessarily say based on what we've seen that customers are being ripped off.
Yes, we cannot necessarily say that. I think we need to do a much more careful analysis of the prices across different players, across different goods, and then see whether it's actually driven by profiteering, as they say, or just by supply and demand dynamics.
What about the aviation industry? Qantas was singled out.
I think overall the report, aviation industry included, does not have strong evidence to say that there is necessarily a problem. There are suggestive things that are indicating that the airfare prices are increasing too much, and you have to take into account the fact that the fixed cost for aviation is really high. They went through a big lean phase during the shutdowns, and so how do they set prices for the long term to be fair prices? And that's a difficult question to answer, and that's why, as the report says, more investigation is required. But we don't know exactly that their prices are too high or not.
What about the electricity sector? It's described in the report as of great concern.
Yes, so in general, the sectors like electricity or aviation, which have high fixed costs, and it's mainly domestic players in the market, these are the sectors where you're more concerned about competition being not enough in Australia. And so electricity is one of them. You can't supply electricity from the US to Australia. So you want to do that analysis. And I think the policy set in place for the competition in Australia may need to evolve over time. And this experience of high price increases might be a good way to see how you can actually improve the competitiveness so that it doesn't happen in the future next time prices shoot up because of some geopolitical reasons globally.
What is the line? Is there a thin line between companies just doing business and profiteering or price gouging? Well, what is that line?
So it's an extremely important question that financial economists and economists think about all the time. In one way, prices are extremely important, and price setting by firms to maximize profits is what helps the allocation of resources in the economy. That's what we say in our economics classes. But on the other hand, we also know, even from theory, that if firms start colluding on their prices instead of competing, so if both of them agree to increase prices instead of one sort of competing with each other, then you'll get high prices, and consumers will lose their surplus and it'll go to the businesses. So So what you have to be careful about is there's not too much collaboration, and so when domestic players have a different dynamic compared to domestic and international, that should raise a sign of alarm. And then also short-term incentives versus long-term incentives. So what's in the interest of some players to maximize profits over the long term is to retain their consumers, not just charge them too high prices and they go elsewhere. So, but if CEOs are incentivized just for 1 year bonuses, then they might not think about the customers leaving for the next year. So those short-term incentives and collaboration and prices, because not enough competition, those are the two things I worry about, and which I think an investigation is needed of how much this was going on in the Australian economy.
Yeah, and so what about the solutions mentioned in the support? No doubt you're in favour of this broad ACCC investigation that Alan Fels is talking about, but also he's talking about more naming and shaming.
I am generally not for naming and shaming. I think that could help a bit in moving customers away from, let's say, the big players into another player. But I think the broader competition dynamic is how Australia, when it becomes a much bigger economy as it grows, it needs more players. It needs more competition, and it needs laws and frameworks to support that. So I'm more in favor of changing laws to improve competition rather than naming and shaming. But that's a personal preference.
Sure. Okay, Contact Saxena, thanks so much for having a chat to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
An emergency bushfire warning has been issued